There is a moment, and if you are honest with yourself, you know exactly which moment I am speaking of. When you look around and realize that no one is coming, no one is going to appear at your door with the answers. No one is going to reach into your chest and rearrange whatever has broken in there. No mentor, no lover, no parent, no friend, no teacher is going to do what only you can do for yourself. That moment is terrifying, and it is also, if you let it be, the most sacred threshold you will ever stand upon. The Buddha knew this moment. He sat beneath a tree, not with a community around him, not held by the hands of family, not guided by the voice of a master, and he faced the totality of his own mind alone. He did not rebuild himself with the help of someone who loved him. He did not wait for the right circumstances, the right teacher, the right lifetime. He sat, he faced, he became. This is not a script about becoming enlightened overnight. This is not a promise that Buddhism will fix your loneliness or dissolve your grief, or make your broken pieces fit together again without pain. Anyone who tells you that is not teaching you Buddhism. They are selling you something. What this is an honest transmission of the most powerful wisdom tradition the human race has ever produced, applied specifically to the one challenge that no relationship, no medication, no success, and no distraction can solve for you, the challenge of rebuilding yourself entirely and completely, from the inside out, relying on nothing outside of your own awareness. You have been through something, maybe many things, maybe the kind of things that stripped you of who you thought you were. Maybe the kind of things that left you staring at your reflection, wondering who that person is and whether they are worth rebuilding at all. Maybe you lost someone. Maybe you lost yourself to someone. Maybe you made choices you cannot undo. Maybe life simply happened to you in ways that felt catastrophic, unfair, or impossible to metabolize. Whatever brought you here, whatever fragment of recognition, whatever whisper of desperation or quiet courage moved you toward this teaching, you are in exactly the right place. Not because everything will now be easy, but because what you are about to receive is not comfort, it is truth. And truth, as the Buddha taught, is the only thing that actually sets you free. There is a concept in Buddhism called the Dhamma, the truth of how things are. Not how we wish they were, not how we fear they might be, how they actually are. And one of the most profound truths within the Dhamma is this: every single human being who has ever walked this earth has had to rebuild themselves. Every teacher, every sage, every ordinary person who found their way through the dark, they all did it the same way, alone, from within, by looking clearly at what was real. The Buddha called this ihipassiko. Come and see for yourself. Not come and believe what I tell you. Not come and follow my rules and trust that I know better. Come and see for yourself. So come. Let us see, together, the 7 most powerful lessons Buddhism offers to anyone who must rebuild themselves without leaning on another. 1. The burning house. Why who you were cannot save you. There is a parable in the Lotus Sutra, one of the most beloved texts in the entire Buddhist canon, about a father whose house catches fire. His children are inside, playing, laughing, completely unaware that the walls around them are burning. The father screams at them to come out. He begs them, he warns them. They do not listen. They are too absorbed in their games, too comfortable in the familiar, too young and too trusting of their surroundings to believe that what they know could be destroying them. So the father calls out to them with a different offer. He tells them there are extraordinary gifts waiting for them outside the house, carts filled with treasures, wonders they cannot imagine, and the children run out. This parable is about you right now, in this exact season of your life. The burning house is the identity you have been living in, the collection of stories you have told yourself about who you are, what you deserve, why you behave the way you behave, what your wounds mean, what your history dictates about your future. The burning house is the personality that was built not by your highest wisdom, but by your earliest pain. The burning house is every coping mechanism, every defensive wall, every relationship pattern, every habitual thought loop that felt like home because it was familiar, even as it was consuming you from the inside. Here is the truth that Buddhism teaches with absolute unflinching clarity. You cannot rebuild yourself by reassembling who you were. That is not rebuilding. That is simply returning to a burning house and repainting the walls. This is the first and perhaps most difficult lesson, because the self we have constructed, even a painful, limited, suffering self, feels like us. It feels like home. We are attached to it. We defend it. We mourn it when it begins to crumble. There is a Pali word, apadana, that the Buddha used to describe this clinging, this desperate grip we maintain on our sense of who we are, even when that sense of self is the very source of our suffering. The reason rebuilding yourself is so terrifying is not because you lack strength or wisdom or resources. It is because rebuilding requires you to first acknowledge that what you are rebuilding from is not just a set of circumstances, it is a self. A constructed, contingent, impermanent self that was never as solid or as permanent as it felt. When the house burns, the initial instinct is grief. It is normal. It is human. Buddhism does not ask you to skip grief. The Buddha himself, in his past lives as documented in the Jataka tales, grieved. He wept. He struggled. Grief is not the obstacle to rebuilding. Grief is often the fire that forces us out of the house. What Buddhism asks you to do is something more subtle and more courageous. It asks you to notice that you, the awareness that is grieving, the presence that is standing outside the burning house watching it fall, that presence is not the house. That presence was never the house. And that presence does not need the house to survive. Nagarjuna, the great 2nd century Buddhist philosopher, wrote extensively about sunyata, the emptiness or openness at the heart of all phenomena, including the self. He was not saying that you do not exist. He was saying that you do not exist in the fixed, permanent, independent way that you assume you do. And this, far from being terrifying, is the most liberating truth in the universe, because if you are not fixed, you can change. If you are not permanent, you can be transformed. If you are not independent from causes and conditions, then by changing your causes and conditions, your thoughts, your attention, your actions, you can become someone entirely new. The self that was built by your wounds, your conditioning, your patterns of reaction, that self was always just a story, a useful story for a time, a story that helped you survive. But you have outgrown the story. The house is burning, and the Father at the gate is calling you towards something extraordinary. The first lesson of rebuilding yourself alone is this: you must let the old you burn, not with violence, not with self-hatred, not with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing, but with the quiet, clear-eyed recognition that what is falling was always going to fall. What is ending was always going to end, and what is waiting for you, outside, in the open air, in the spaciousness of an identity not yet constructed, is not emptiness in the frightening sense. It is the extraordinary freedom of beginning again. Ask yourself today, with the honesty that this teaching demands, which parts of who I call myself were built by pain? Which patterns do I defend because they are genuinely wise? And which do I defend simply because they are familiar? Which story about myself am I most afraid to let go of? And then sit with the answer, not to fix it immediately, not to judge it, just to see it clearly, as it is, because clear seeing, samadhi, right view, is where every genuine rebuilding begins. You cannot renovate a burning house, but you can walk out of it, and you can begin, from the open ground of what you actually are, to build something that was never there before. That is the first step, and it is enough for now. 2. The second arrow. How you have been wounding yourself twice. The Buddha once asked his monks a question. He said, "If a person is struck by an arrow, do they suffer?" The monks said yes, obviously they suffer. Then the Buddha asked, if that same person, after being struck by the first arrow, immediately fires a second arrow into themselves, do they suffer more? The monks said yes, of course. The Buddha then said, in life, We cannot always control the first arrow. The pain of loss, the pain of betrayal, the pain of failure, the pain of circumstances beyond our control, that is the first arrow. But the second arrow, the one we fire into ourselves, is always our own doing. This teaching is deceptively simple and devastatingly profound, because when you sit with it honestly, you begin to see that almost all of the suffering involved in rebuilding yourself is not actually coming from what happened to you. It is coming from what you are doing to yourself in response to what happened. The first arrow might be a relationship that ended. The second arrow is the 10,000 thoughts that follow. I am unlovable. I am broken. I chose wrong. I will never find this again. I wasted years. I am stupid. I should have known. I am too much. I am not enough. I am fundamentally flawed. The first arrow might be a failure. In business, in art, in an exam, in a creative endeavor. The second arrow is the story that follows. I never had what it takes. Other people are naturally gifted and I am not. This proves what I always suspected about myself. I should stop trying. I am an imposter, and now everyone can see it. The first arrow might be grief, the death of someone beloved, the loss of a life you had planned, the dissolution of a version of yourself you had invested everything in building. The second arrow is the refusal to allow the grief to move through you naturally, and instead the construction of a permanent monument to it, a story about how life is cruel, how you are cursed, how happiness is for other people but not for you. Buddhism does not teach that the first arrow does not hurt. It teaches that the first arrow is, in many cases, unavoidable. Pain is inherent to existence. The Buddha's first noble truth, dukkha, acknowledges this with radical honesty. Life contains suffering. Loss is real. Grief is real. Failure is real. Rejection is real. The disintegration of the self is real. You are not imagining your pain. You are not being dramatic. You are not weak for hurting. But here is what Buddhism adds, with the precision of a surgeon. Most of what prolongs your suffering beyond its natural duration, most of what turns a wound into a permanent wound, most of what makes rebuilding feel impossible is the second arrow. And the second arrow is in your own hand. Now, before we go further, we must address something that many spiritual teachings get dangerously wrong at this point. There is a form of toxic spiritual bypassing, a misuse of teachings like this one, where the second arrow framework becomes yet another weapon of self-attack. People hear this teaching and think, I am causing my own suffering, which means I am stupid and weak, and this is all my fault and I should be ashamed. And then they fire a third arrow, and a fourth. This is the opposite of what the Buddha intended. The teaching of the second arrow is not a judgment. It is not a condemnation. It is a map. It is an act of enormous compassion toward yourself. The recognition that you have the power to stop some of the pain, not all of it, not immediately, but some of it. And that recognition is power. In Buddhist practice, the second arrow is worked with primarily through mindfulness, sati, the quality of clear, non-judgmental, present-moment awareness that simply observes what is happening in the mind without immediately reacting to it, without adding layers of story onto it, without firing additional arrows. When you are in the process of rebuilding yourself and the mind begins its relentless commentary, you are not good enough, this will not work, you have wasted too much time, you do not deserve peace, other people do not have to work this hard, you are fundamentally broken. Mindfulness does not try to argue with these thoughts. It does not try to replace them with positive affirmations. It simply notices them, it names them, it recognizes them as thoughts, second arrows, and in that recognition creates a gap between the thought and the automatic suffering the thought would otherwise produce. This gap is everything. This gap is where freedom lives. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said something so simple and so devastating that it is worth sitting with for days. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. The second arrow is the expert mind, the mind that thinks it already knows what everything means, that already has a story for every sensation, that is already certain about your limitations and your fate. The mindful, present moment awareness that Buddhism cultivates is the beginner's mind, open, curious, not yet decided, full of possibility. When you are rebuilding yourself alone, you will face the second arrow constantly. The mind will try to convince you that your solitude means abandonment, that your struggle means failure, that your slowness means weakness, that your grief means you will never be whole, that your confusion means you are lost forever. Each of these thoughts is an arrow you can choose not to fire, not by suppressing the thought, not by pretending it does not arise, but by seeing it clearly, calling it by its name, thought, story, second arrow, and then gently, without violence, returning your attention to what is actually true in this moment, what is actually real, what is actually here. What is actually here? You are breathing. That is real. You are aware. That is real. The moment in which you exist right now is not the worst moment that has ever existed. It simply is. That is real. The practice of noticing the second arrow and choosing again and again and again not to embed it deeper, that is not a small thing. That is one of the most powerful acts a human being can perform. It is the difference between a wound that heals and a wound that becomes a life sentence. Begin today, not by eliminating the second arrows entirely. That would be an unrealistic demand and itself a third arrow. Begin simply by noticing when the mind turns against you, when the story darkens, when the narration of your own unworthiness begins. Just notice, just name it. This is a second arrow. I am firing this into myself. I can pause. That pause is the beginning of rebuilding. That pause is where the new self is first given permission to breathe. 3. Impermanence is not your enemy. It is your blueprint. If you have spent any time near Buddhist teachings, you have heard the word anicca. It means impermanence. Everything changes, everything passes, nothing remains fixed. And if you are in the midst of rebuilding yourself, you have likely encountered this teaching and found it, depending on the day, either deeply comforting or profoundly annoying. On the days when you are drowning in pain, the reminder that this too shall pass can feel like a lifeline. On the days when you are clinging to a memory of who you were, or a person you lost, or a life you had, the reminder that nothing lasts can feel like salt in the wound. Both responses are valid, and both responses miss something essential about what the teaching of impermanence actually means for someone who is rebuilding themselves. Most people encounter impermanence as a teaching about loss. Things end, people leave, bodies age, empires crumble. Yes, all of this is true, but impermanence is not primarily a teaching about loss. It is primarily a teaching about possibility. Think about what impermanence actually means for you right now in this season of reconstruction. It means that who you are today is not who you will be in 5 years. It means that the patterns of thought that torment you are not permanent fixtures of your psyche. They are conditioned, learned, and therefore changeable. It means that the weight you are carrying right now is not your permanent condition. It is a temporary configuration of causes and conditions that can and will shift. It means that the story you are telling yourself about your limitations, your wounds, your failures, your future, that story is made of the same substance as everything else in the universe. Impermanent, changeable, not final. The Zen tradition has a beautiful and brutal phrase, "Die before you die." It sounds alarming. It is actually the most hopeful instruction ever given to a human being. It means let the old self die now. Let the identity that was built by your conditioning, your fear, your smallness, let it die consciously, deliberately in this moment. Because if you die before you die, when you die, you will realize there is nothing to die. And in the meantime, you will have lived as someone who had already shed the weight of a false self. To apply impermanence as a blueprint for rebuilding yourself, you must do something that the contemporary self-help world rarely asks of you. You must stop trying to get back to who you were. This is one of the most common and most devastating mistakes people make when they are in the process of rebuilding. They frame the goal as returning to a previous state, the person I was before the divorce, before the depression, before the failure, before the loss. They measure their progress by how close they are getting to the version of themselves that existed before the breaking. But Buddhism would say that version is gone, not because you failed to preserve it, not because something destroyed it that should not have, but because nothing in the universe can be preserved. Because impermanence is not a malfunction, it is the nature of reality, and the old version of you, even if it felt good, even if it contained joy you missed terribly, that version was always going to transform. Your pain simply accelerated a process that was always going to happen. So the question is not how do I get back to who I was? The question is who am I becoming, now that I am no longer constrained by who I was? Impermanence does not just mean your pain will end. It means your very self is permanently under construction. Every single thought you choose to engage with is laying new neural pathways. Every moment of conscious attention is reshaping the architecture of your mind. Every choice to respond rather than react, to pause rather than lash out, to practice rather than perform. These are not small things. They are the raw material of a new self. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron, drawing from the Tibetan tradition, speaks of groundlessness, the uncomfortable, vertiginous experience of realizing that there is no solid ground beneath you, that everything you thought was permanent is actually in motion. She says that most of us spend our lives desperately seeking ground, certainty, stability, a solid sense of self, and that this seeking is itself the source of our suffering, because the ground was never there. We were always standing on water. And the moment we stop clawing for solid ground and learn to be present with the groundlessness, to swim rather than claw, something shifts. That shift is not comfort. It is not the warm feeling of security. It is something better. It is freedom. The freedom of someone who no longer needs the world to be different from what it is in order to be okay. This is what impermanence, properly understood, gives you as a rebuilder. It gives you the radical permission to be different from who you were. It gives you the evidence-based hope that change is not only possible but inevitable. The only question is whether you participate consciously in the change or whether you are dragged by it. It gives you the daily reminder that today's suffering is not tomorrow's suffering unless you carry it there intentionally. And it gives you something else, something rarer, more precious. It gives you an appreciation for the present moment that is impossible to manufacture through any other means. When you truly understand that this moment will never exist again, not this quality of light, not this particular ache, not this precise configuration of your awareness, you stop rushing through it. You stop wishing it were different. You stop treating your current experience as an obstacle between you and some future state of completion. You are not broken, waiting to be fixed. You are impermanent, in the process of becoming. There is an infinite difference between those two sentences, and everything about how you rebuild yourself depends on which sentence you choose to inhabit. Live in the second one. Stand in the groundlessness. Let the old self fall away like autumn leaves, not violently plucked, not desperately clung to, but released naturally, because that is what leaves do. And then, in the bare branches of what you become after the falling, notice the extraordinary thing. The tree is still standing. The tree was never the leaves, and the spring will come. Impermanence is your blueprint because it tells you the truth. You were never finished. You were always in process. And the process that is happening now, this difficult, disorienting, sometimes devastating process of deconstruction and reconstruction, this is not a detour from your life. This is your life. This is the actual content of a human existence, lived with eyes open. Let it teach you. Let it move through you. Let it make you new. 4. The raft, not the shore. Buddhism as a tool, not an identity. The Buddha told a parable of a man who needed to cross a river. The man built a raft, crossed the river, and arrived safely on the other shore. Then the Buddha asked, what should the man do with the raft? Should he carry it on his head for the rest of his journey in case he meets another river? Or should he leave it at the bank and continue walking? The answer is obvious. You leave the raft at the bank. And then the Buddha said something that shocked his audience and continues to shock people today. Even the Dhamma itself, even his own teachings, are the raft, not the shore. They are a means, a vehicle, a set of tools. They are not the destination. They are not an identity to wear. They are not a belief system to cling to as a substitute for the beliefs you abandoned when the old self burned. This is the fourth lesson of rebuilding yourself alone, and it is one that many people in the midst of rebuilding desperately need to hear. Do not rebuild yourself into a new rigidity. Do not replace one fixed identity with another. Do not grab Buddhism or any philosophy, any spiritual path, any healing modality, and clutch it the way a drowning person clutches a life preserver, white-knuckled, terrified of what happens if you let go. Use the raft. Be grateful for the raft, but do not become the raft. When people are rebuilding themselves after a significant rupture, a loss, a breakdown, an awakening, a failure, there is a very natural and understandable impulse to immediately construct a new identity, to go from "I was the person in that relationship" to "I am now a spiritual practitioner," to go from "I was the person who had that career" to "I am now someone who has transcended material ambition," to go from "I was the person who trusted and was hurt" to "I am now someone who needs no one." These new identities feel like rebuilding. They look like rebuilding from the outside, but often they are simply new houses, slightly better constructed perhaps, with better insulation and more attractive interiors, but still houses, still constructions of the mind designed to give you a sense of solid ground where the Dhamma is trying to teach you to be comfortable with groundlessness. The Buddhist concept of anatta, non-self, is the most radical and the most misunderstood teaching in the entire tradition. Most people encounter it and think it means you do not exist, or that the self is an illusion to be dismissed. This is a misreading. Anatta does not deny that you have experiences, preferences, a history, a character. It says that the rigid, unchanging, fundamentally independent self that you believe yourself to be, that one is not real, not because existence is meaningless, but because existence is richer, more fluid, more interconnected, and more dynamic than any fixed identity can capture. Rebuilding yourself in the light of anatta means building lightly, building functionally, building with the understanding that what you are constructing is not a permanent home, but a useful vehicle for this particular season of your journey. That the values you are cultivating, the habits you are forming, the ways of seeing you are developing, these are real and important and worth building carefully, but they are not you. They are expressions of you. And you, the awareness behind them, is not a fixed thing that can be permanently constructed. This is actually profoundly liberating when you let it in, because it means that you do not have to get the rebuilding perfectly right. You do not have to arrive at the correct, final, definitive version of yourself and then protect it forever. You are allowed to build and use and release, to practice and refine and change, to be different next year from who you are today, without that difference meaning you failed. There is a danger in spiritual communities, and Buddhism is not immune to this, of creating what might be called spiritual identity replacement. The person who was once defined by their career becomes defined by their meditation practice. The person who was once defined by their relationship becomes defined by their Dharma study. The external content changes, but the psychological structure is identical. I am this thing, and this thing must be defended, and my value as a person depends on this thing remaining intact. Buddhism, at its most authentic, refuses this. The entire point of the path is not to exchange one prison for a more enlightened prison. It is to recognize the nature of all prisons, all constructed identities, all fixed selves, and to move through the world with the fluidity of someone who is no longer trapped inside any of them. So as you rebuild, hold your tools lightly, hold your practice lightly, not carelessly, but lightly. Practice with full commitment and zero attachment. Sit in meditation because it is useful, because it changes the architecture of your mind, because it develops the capacity for presence and clarity that is the foundation of a life well lived. But do not sit in meditation so that you can call yourself a meditator. Do not practice compassion so that you can call yourself a compassionate person. Do not study the Dhamma so that you can call yourself a Buddhist. Do these things because they make you more alive, because they bring you closer to what is actually real, because they reduce suffering, yours and others, because they open you, because they help you cross the river. And then, when the river is crossed, when you are on the other shore, when the season of intensive rebuilding has given way to a new way of moving through the world, have the courage to set the raft down. Have the courage to not need the crisis anymore. Have the courage to move forward without clinging to the very tools that saved you. This is one of the most important and least discussed aspects of genuine recovery and genuine rebuilding. At some point, you have to be willing to stop being someone who is rebuilding. At some point, the story of your rupture and your reconstruction has to become one chapter among many, rather than your entire identity. Buddhism prepared you for that moment from the very beginning. The raft was always meant to be set down. You were always meant to walk free. Walk free. 5. Metta. The radical practice of being your own ally. There is a practice in Buddhism called metta, usually translated as loving kindness. It is one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, the most elevated states of heart that a human being can cultivate. And it is the practice that is most directly relevant to the project of rebuilding yourself alone, because it addresses the single greatest obstacle that most people encounter when they try to do exactly that. The obstacle is this: most people, when they are broken and trying to rebuild, are not kind to themselves. They are, in fact, at war with themselves. They are attempting to rebuild using self-criticism as a hammer, shame as a blueprint, and inadequacy as the building material. And then they wonder why the structure keeps collapsing. Metta, in its traditional form, begins with yourself. This is counterintuitive in cultures that have been told that self-concern is selfishness. It is counterintuitive in religious traditions that have taught that placing yourself first is sinful or shameful. And it is counterintuitive to anyone who is in pain and has decided, consciously or unconsciously, that the pain is deserved. The traditional metta phrases, though they vary across traditions, follow a pattern something like this: may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I be at peace. You direct these wishes toward yourself, then to loved ones, then to neutral people, then to difficult people, then to all beings without exception. But here is what most introductions to metta fail to communicate adequately. This is not a pleasant visualization exercise. For many people, particularly those who are in the process of rebuilding after significant suffering, directing loving kindness toward yourself is the most difficult, the most confronting, the most emotionally raw thing they will ever attempt to do. Because in order to wish yourself well, you must first believe, even slightly, even tentatively, even against the evidence of your inner critic, that you are worth wishing well. And for someone who has been through rupture, failure, loss, or prolonged suffering, that belief can feel almost impossible to access. The Buddha knew this. He did not design metta as a practice for people who already feel lovable. He designed it precisely for people who do not. He designed it as a method of uncovering, gradually, through repeated, patient, persistent practice, the compassion that is not a quality you develop from scratch, but a quality that is already present in the deepest nature of awareness, simply buried under layers of conditioning, criticism, and pain. Karuna, compassion, is metta's sister practice. Where metta wishes happiness to all beings, karuna responds specifically to suffering with the wish that the suffering be relieved. And when you are rebuilding yourself alone, karuna directed inward is revolutionary. It is the practice of sitting with your own pain, not running from it, not dramatizing it, not judging it, and simply saying, "This hurts. I see that this hurts. I wish this pain to ease. This is not weakness. This is the opposite of weakness. The Dalai Lama, when Western psychologists began to present research on self-criticism versus self-compassion, was reportedly surprised that Westerners found self-compassion difficult. In Tibetan Buddhist culture, bodhicitta, the heart of awakening, the compassionate wish for all beings to be free of suffering, is considered the most potent force in the universe, and that force must begin, with oneself. Research in contemporary psychology, led by Dr. Kristin Neff and others, has now confirmed what the Buddhist tradition has known for 2.5 millennia. Self-compassion is not self-indulgence. Self-compassionate people are not weaker, more complacent, or more self-absorbed than self-critical people. They are, on the measurable evidence, more resilient, more motivated, more capable of taking responsibility for their mistakes without being destroyed by them, more able to persist through difficulty, more able to extend genuine compassion to others. Because you cannot give what you do not have, you cannot be a genuinely loving, open, compassionate presence in the world if you are spending the majority of your inner resources at war with yourself. The metta practice is not a feel-good detour from the serious work of rebuilding. It is the most serious work of rebuilding. It is the laying of the actual foundation. Here is how to begin if you have never done it. Find a quiet place. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Take 3 long, slow, intentional breaths, letting each exhale release a little of the tension you are carrying, and then with as much genuine intention as you can muster, even if it feels small, even if it feels forced, even if the inner critic immediately objects, say these words silently to yourself: may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I be at peace. Do not worry if you do not feel it immediately. Do not worry if resistance arises. Resistance is information. Notice what arises when you try to wish yourself well. Notice where in your body there is tightness, reluctance, discomfort. Notice the thoughts that tell you this is self-indulgent, or that you do not deserve happiness, or that this kind of practice is for people who have not done the things you have done, or been through the things you have been through. These resistances are not obstacles to the practice. They are the practice. They are the very places where the healing needs to happen, where the second arrow has been embedded the deepest, where the burning house has the most stubborn walls. Stay with them. Keep returning to the phrases, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be at peace. Keep returning, day after day, sitting after sitting, moment after moment, in the middle of ordinary life. When you make a mistake, when you feel small, when the inner critic fires up, when the grief surges, just return. Return to the intention, return to the wish, return to the possibility that you are worth wishing well. And slowly, not overnight, not in a single dramatic revelation, but slowly, the way stone is shaped by water, something changes. The voice of self-criticism does not disappear, but its authority diminishes. Its volume lowers. The space between the self-critical thought and your identification with that thought begins to widen. And into that widening space comes something extraordinary. Not happiness exactly, not the absence of pain, but something older and deeper than either. Something that the Buddhist texts call the Brahma Viharas for a reason, the divine abodes, not because they are otherworldly, but because when you inhabit them, you feel at home in a way you have never quite felt at home anywhere before. You feel at home in yourself. And that homecoming is the entire point of rebuilding. Not to construct a more impressive self for the world to admire, not to heal so completely that no one can tell you we're ever broken, but to come home, to be your own ally, to be the one person in your life who will never abandon you, never condemn you, never require you to be different from what you are in this moment in order to deserve kindness. Be that person for yourself. Begin with may I be happy. Begin there. And do not stop. 6. The dark night. Why falling apart is part of the path. There is a teaching that is almost never mentioned in the cheerful, Instagram-friendly version of Buddhism that has become popular in the contemporary West. It is a teaching that the serious Buddhist traditions have always known about, have always prepared practitioners for, and have always considered essential to genuine spiritual maturity. It is called, in various traditions, the dark night of the soul, borrowed from the Christian mystic John of the Cross, or in the Tibetan tradition, it appears in descriptions of the bardos, the liminal spaces between states of consciousness, between death and rebirth. And the teaching is simply this: the path of genuine transformation is not a steady upward climb. It is not a smooth progression from suffering to peace, from broken to whole, from confused to clear. It contains descents, sometimes very dark, very disorienting, very frightening descents. And these descents are not failures of the practice. They are not signs that you have gone wrong. They are, in many cases, signs that the practice is working. This is the sixth lesson of rebuilding yourself alone, and it may be the most important one for someone who has been trying to rebuild and has found that the process does not feel like the inspiring recovery narrative they expected. If you have found, partway through your reconstruction, that things got darker before they got lighter, that the process of letting go of the old self was followed by a period of feeling as though you had no self at all, if you have found yourself in a strange, hollow, disorienting middle space where the old ways of being are no longer available and the new ways have not yet solidified, you are not failing. You are in the bardo. You are in the dark night. You are exactly where the most important work happens. The Christian mystics term, the dark night, refers to the experience of feeling utterly abandoned by the divine, a stripping away of all consolation, all certainty, all felt sense of meaning or direction or support. For the Buddhist practitioner, it appears in a different form but with similar phenomenology, a period during which the practices that once felt alive begin to feel dry, mechanical, meaningless, a period during which the insights that once seemed so clear become obscured, a period during which the self that was beginning to emerge through the work of reconstruction seems to dissolve again, and what remains is a kind of raw, exposed, groundless awareness that knows it cannot go back, but does not yet know how to go forward. The Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa called this state the bardo of becoming, the liminal space of transformation in which the old is genuinely gone and the new has not yet arrived. He wrote about it with unusual frankness, acknowledging that it is uncomfortable, that practitioners often panic in this space and try to escape it, and that the escape attempts, the grasping for any new identity, any new certainty, any new comfort, are precisely what prolongs the transition. The instruction for the dark night in Buddhist practice is counterintuitive. Do not flee it. Do not pathologize it. Do not immediately reach for the next technique, the next teacher, the next explanation, the next framework that will give you ground beneath your feet again. Sit in the groundlessness. Practice in the groundlessness. Trust that the awareness in which the darkness is appearing is not itself dark. This distinction is crucial and life-saving. There is a difference between the contents of your experience and the awareness in which those contents appear. The darkness, the confusion, the dissolution, the grief. These are contents, experiences, whether they are appearing within something, and that something, the open, knowing awareness that is aware of the darkness, is not itself dark. It is not itself confused. It is not itself dissolved. The Dzogchen teachings of Tibetan Buddhism point to this distinction as the most fundamental insight available to a human being. Rigpa, the recognition of the nature of mind, is not an experience of pleasant clarity achieved after all the confusion is resolved. It is the recognition of the awareness that is present even in the midst of confusion, even in the darkest night, even in the most dissolving moment. It is the recognition that you are not the storm, you are the sky in which the storm appears. This recognition does not require the storm to stop. It does not require you to be unaffected by the storm. It simply requires you to see that the storm and the sky are not the same thing, and that you in your deepest nature are the sky. When you are rebuilding yourself alone, and you enter the dark night, and you likely will if you are doing the work seriously, the most important thing you can do is refuse the stories that the dark night generates. The dark night will tell you that the darkness means you have failed, that it means you are too broken to heal, that it means the practice is not working, that it means you should abandon the path and try something else, that it means there is something fundamentally wrong with you that all the Buddhism in the world cannot fix. None of these stories are true. They are weather, they are contents appearing in awareness, they are second arrows fired automatically in the darkness, and you do not have to embed them. What you can do instead, what Buddhist practice asks of you in the dark night, is simply continue. Sit, breathe, notice, return. Not because the sitting will immediately dissolve the darkness, but because the act of continuing to practice in the darkness builds something that no amount of practicing in the light can build. The deep, embodied, unshakable knowing that you can be present with anything, that you can face the full spectrum of human experience, including its darkest valleys, without being destroyed. That awareness itself is indestructible, even when everything it contains feels fragile. The teachers who are most trustworthy, in any tradition, are not the ones who have never suffered, they are the ones who have suffered, and who did not use the suffering as a reason to close. They are the ones who went into the dark night and came out not with answers, but with a quality of presence that no quantity of pleasant experience could have generated. They are the ones who rebuilt themselves not once but many times, and who carry in their bodies and their teaching the authority of someone who knows, from the inside, that the dark is survivable, that the dissolution is not death, that the groundlessness does not last forever, and that what comes after it, if you do not flee it, if you do not add to it, if you simply let it be what it is something extraordinary. You will not hear this on most wellness podcasts. You will not find it in most self-help books. But it is the truth that the greatest Buddhist teachers across 2.5 millennia have transmitted without interruption. The path through is the path through. The darkness is not beside the path. It is the path. And you are capable of walking it. Walk it, slowly, without needing it to be different, without needing it to end today, and know that every step you take in the darkness, every time you sit when you do not want to, every time you breathe when the breath feels meaningless, every time you return your attention to what is real when the mind is insisting on its catastrophic stories, every one of these steps is accumulating something quiet and strong and real, something that will be there when the morning comes. 7. The lotus and the mud. Becoming something the suffering made possible. We come now to the final lesson, and it is the most important one, because everything that has come before, the burning house, the second arrow, impermanence, the raft, metta, the dark night, all of it has been preparation for this one truth that changes everything. The lotus flower blooms in mud, only in mud, not in clear water, not in pristine conditions, only in the dark, murky, dense, apparently uninhabitable mud, and it rises through that mud, not despite it, but because of it. The mud is not incidental to the lotus, the mud is the medium. The mud is what makes the lotus possible. You already know what this is pointing to. You have known it since before you began reading this. You have known it in the way that a person knows something that hurts to acknowledge, because acknowledging it requires you to stop fighting your history and start using it. The suffering you have been through, the breaking, the burning, the dark night, the dissolution of the old self, this is your mud, and it is not something that happened to you instead of your life. It is not a detour from your life. It is not a mistake that derailed the better story you were supposed to be living. It is the medium, the very specific, irreplaceable, unsubstitutable medium in which the person you are becoming can grow. There is a concept in Buddhism called bodhicitta, the awakening heart, the heart of enlightenment. And the most profound thing about bodhicitta is this: it does not arise in the absence of suffering. It arises through suffering. The compassion that a bodhisattva carries, the compassion that motivated the Buddha himself to choose to remain in the world and teach rather than dissolve into pure awareness, is not an abstract philosophical position. It is a living, breathing, embodied knowing that comes from having suffered, having faced the suffering with eyes open, and having discovered through that facing that the awareness in which the suffering appears is fundamentally compassionate. You know things now that you could not have known before, not philosophical things, not things you read in a book, things you know in your body, in your bones, in the specific quality of your attention when you sit with someone who is hurting. You know what it feels like to have the flaw disappear. You know what it is to need something that no one can give you and to have to find your own way to it. You know the specific texture of the dark night. You know what it costs to choose to practice when the practice feels meaningless. You know the difference between comfort and peace. You know the difference between happiness and wholeness. You know these things because you have been through the mud. And these are not small things to know. These are the things that make a human life genuinely useful to other human lives. These are the things that transform a person from someone who has read about compassion to someone who embodies it. These are the things the Buddha was pointing to when he said that he taught from his own experience, Ehipassiko, come and see for yourself. You have seen, perhaps not everything, perhaps not yet, but you have seen what the burning house looks like from inside. You have seen what happens when you fire the second arrow and what becomes possible when you do not. You have felt impermanence not as a concept, but as a lived reality. The ground moving beneath you, the self you trusted dissolving, the certainty you relied on revealing itself as provisional. You have practiced metta, possibly for the first time, and discovered that it is harder to be kind to yourself than to anyone else, and that this discovery itself is a teaching. You have moved through the dark night or are moving through it now, and you are still here, still aware, still capable of receiving this teaching, which means the awareness in which the darkness appeared was not destroyed by the darkness. This is not nothing. This is everything. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, in writing about the lotus and the mud, said something that has stayed with practitioners across the world for decades. No mud, no lotus. He did not say less mud, smaller lotus. He said no mud, no lotus. The correlation is total. The depth of the root in the mud determines the height of the flower above the water. Your mud is specific. Your mud has particular qualities, particular kinds of pain, particular patterns of loss, particular textures of confusion and dissolution that no one else in the world has experienced in quite the same configuration. And that specificity is not a curse. It is a gift, though a difficult one, because it means that what you are becoming through this experience, the compassion, the insight, the depth, the particular quality of presence that is being forged in you, is also specific, also unrepeatable, also something that the world needs in exactly the form that only you can deliver it. This is not grandiosity. This is not the wounded ego wrapping its pain in significance to avoid sitting with it. This is the bodhisattva ideal, the recognition that genuine awakening, genuine healing, genuine transformation is never just for oneself. The lotus does not bloom in the mud for the benefit of the mud. It blooms into the light, it opens, and its opening is witnessed by everything around it. You are not rebuilding yourself so that you can arrive at a private, personal peace that you guard jealously from a safe distance. You are rebuilding yourself, whether you are fully conscious of this yet or not, so that you can become someone whose very presence is useful, whose depth is a resource, whose having been through the mud means that when you reach back to offer a hand, the hand that extends from the water knows where the mud is, knows what it feels like, does not pretend it is not there. The Buddhist tradition calls these people bodhisattvas, beings who have oriented their entire existence around the liberation of all who suffer. You do not need to aspire to that title. You do not need to take formal vows or announce a spiritual identity. You simply need to take seriously the possibility that what you are going through is not being wasted, that it is accumulating, that the person who is emerging from this mud, slowly, rootward, against resistance, in the dark, has something to offer that the person who was never tested cannot. And now, as we come to the end of these 7 lessons, I want to say something directly to you specifically, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever form your particular burning house took, whatever mud you are sitting in right now. You do not need anyone's permission to rebuild yourself. You do not need a teacher to authorize your practice. You do not need a community to validate your experience. You do not need a tradition to give your suffering meaning. The meaning is already there, inherent in the very fact that you are aware of your suffering and are choosing in this moment to face it rather than flee it. The Buddha rebuilt himself alone, beneath a tree, with nothing but his own awareness and the determination to see clearly. He emerged from that solitude not diminished but luminous, not as someone who had solved the problem of human suffering, but as someone who had discovered that the awareness in which suffering appears is fundamentally free, and that discovery changed the world. Your solitude, this particular season of being without the scaffolding you thought you needed, is not a punishment, it is a crucible. The very conditions under which certain qualities, certain understandings, certain depths of character can only be forged. Stay with it, practice with it. Use the 7 lessons not as a checklist, but as a living map, one you return to again and again as the territory changes, as you change, as the mud slowly gives way to the clear water, and the clear water to the open air, and the open air to the light. The first lesson says, let the burning house burn. Let the old self go. See clearly. The second lesson says, stop firing the second arrow. Notice the mind's tendency to add suffering to suffering. Create the gap. The third lesson says, impermanence is your blueprint. You are always in process. Change is not your enemy. It is the medium of your becoming. The fourth lesson says, hold the raft lightly. Use the tools. Do not become the tools. Walk free. The fifth lesson says, be your own ally. Practice metta. Begin with yourself. May I be happy. May I be at peace. Return to these words until they stop being words and become something that lives in you. The sixth lesson says, the dark night is the path. Walk it. Do not flee. Trust the awareness in which the darkness appears. And the seventh lesson says, no mud, no lotus. What you are going through is not separate from what you are becoming. The suffering is the medium. The depth of the root determines the height of the flower. And you are rooting, even now, even in this, into something real. You are not broken, you are becoming. And you are doing it alone in the deepest, truest sense. Not the aloneness of abandonment, but the aloneness of ahipasiko, coming and seeing for yourself, trusting your own awareness, finding in the center of your own experience the one thing no one can give you and no one can take away. May you find it. May it find you. May the lotus in you rise. Before we close, one more thing must be said, because it is perhaps the thing that is hardest to say and the most necessary to hear. There is a cultural narrative around healing and rebuilding that is deeply embedded in the way most of us have been raised. It says that recovering from difficulty is a social process, that we heal in community, that we need others, that reaching out is strength and solitude is weakness, that isolation is pathology and connection is the medicine. There is truth in this. Community, connection, genuine relationship, these are not trivial. The Buddha himself lived in community for most of his teaching life. The Sangha, the community of practitioners, is one of the 3 jewels of Buddhism alongside the Buddha and the Dharma. Human beings are not meant to be isolated. Belonging is a genuine need, but there is something in this narrative that, if swallowed whole, robs you of something essential, something that no community can give you and no relationship can substitute for, and that is the capacity to be alone with yourself without being destroyed by it. Most people have never truly learned to be alone. They have been alone physically, in their room, in their apartment, in the long hours of the night, but rarely alone in the deeper sense, rarely alone with their own awareness, without the numbing comfort of distraction, without the narrative of other people's opinions running constantly in the background, without the performance of self that is always present when we are with others. True solitude, the kind the Buddha practiced, the kind the desert fathers and mothers practiced, the kind every genuine contemplative tradition in human history has honored, is not isolation, it is intimacy. Intimacy with yourself, intimacy with the present moment, intimacy with the quality of your own awareness, undiluted by the constant noise of social existence. And here is what that intimacy reveals every single time, without exception. You are enough. Not in the motivational poster sense, not in the way that denies your need for growth, your need for others, your need for community and love and connection, but in the much more fundamental sense that the awareness you are, the bare knowing, the simple presence, the fact that there is something it is like to be you, that is enough. That has always been enough. That cannot be diminished by failure, by loss or grief, by the burning of any house, by the depth of any mud. You came into this life alone. In the Buddhist view, you have come into countless lives alone. And in each one, the work of awakening, the real work, the irreducible core of the practice, is always done alone. The teacher can point, the community can support, the tradition can transmit, but the actual looking, the actual seeing, the actual meeting of your own awareness with clear eyes, that is yours to do, and no one else can do it for you. This is not a limitation. This is the most extraordinary gift the universe has given you, the capacity to wake up, the capacity to see clearly, the capacity to rebuild yourself not from the outside in but from the inside out, from the ground of your own awareness, from the truth of what you actually are beneath all the constructed selves and burning houses and accumulated second arrows. The capacity, in short, to be free, not free from circumstances, not free from suffering. The first noble truth will not be repealed on your behalf. Not free from loss or impermanence or the inevitable turning of seasons, but free in the way the Buddha was free, aware, present, compassionate, grounded in the nature of mind rather than in the shifting contents of experience, undefeated not because life has not struck you, but because you have discovered that what you essentially are is not something that can be struck. This is the art of rebuilding yourself alone. This is what 7 lessons and 2.5 millennia of tradition have been pointing toward. This is the destination that is also always the path. Begin now, begin here. Begin in the only moment that has ever existed or will ever exist, this one. And when you have finished rebuilding, when the lotus has risen and the light has come, reach back into the mud for the next one who is sinking. That reaching back, that outstretched hand, that bodhisattva impulse born directly from your own descent and ascent, that is the greatest thing this work will produce. Not a healed self, a useful one. That is the art. That is the path. That is the practice. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be free. And may you who have read this, who have sat in the mud and felt the groundlessness and faced the burning and walked the dark night, and still kept going, may you most of all know the peace that was always yours. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.